Na kągi, į mūsų sceną dabar vėl noriu pakviesti tai Auriga Baltics atstovą, tai bus Artemii Chernega, software engineer of Auriga Baltics. Yes.
Well, first a bit about myself. My name is Artemii and I was born in Kiev. After finishing school in Ukraine, I moved to Lithuania and enrolled in the Kaunas University of Technology, which I successfully graduated from in 2021. And I'm passionate about front-end development. Before becoming an employee of Auriga Baltics, I was participating in development of educational services web platform in a startup. And yeah, finally, my current experience includes working in a digital banking platform together with our professional team of Auriga. Yes, the Auriga is a company with a long history. We're in Vilnius since 2010. Over 120 clients worldwide. And in the global outsourcing top 100 ranking, we've been since 2008. Auriga Baltics also received the Strongest in Lithuania award 7 times in a row. And our typical projects include embedded and system software development, the business solutions development, and also software development for medical purposes. So yeah, today we will discuss first of all the architecture of each framework and what is under the hood, the ecosystem and the tools which are usually used with them, the performance we will review a Perf track from Google Labs, learning curve and difficulty of concepts of each framework, and yeah, finally we will talk about trends for a current year. But yeah, before moving along, please raise your hand if you know at least one framework. Raise your 2 hands if you know 2 frameworks. And if you know 3 frameworks, please stand up for a round of applause. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yes, indeed. React introduces such concept as JSX or JavaScript XML, which allows us to write inside our JavaScript files the HTML elements and tags. So how it usually works? So React framework is component-based, which JSX component is being transformed into regular JavaScript files by React runtime library, which then defines the structure of so-called React virtual DOM. It operates in a retained mode, and basically it provides for the real DOM the next state and understands like which would be the most optimal way of updating it. And of course it receives back the input and events from the real DOM. React focuses mainly on development of user interfaces, and unlike its predecessors, it does not impose developers to use model view controller pattern, because the JavaScript frameworks arise as to be used within a single page application. So everything happens within the same HTML file. It's just the React determines which components should be loaded. And with an old modern view controller pattern, the single page applications would have a lot of controllers depending on the same data model, which will result in a rat nest of state and difficulties in understanding what is the source of truth for each of them. Yeah, moving on, the Vue framework. The Vue framework is the newest of the 3. It aimed, to create the simplest API for developing user interfaces, being encouraged by its predecessors. So Vue usually suggests using so-called pattern as view model, right? So each Vue instance is a view model layer, which enables a two-way communications. So basically bidirectional data flow between model and Vue. And in the context of Vue framework, the Vue layer is the DOM element. So when Vue walks through all DOM nodes with the precision to each text node and provides a reactive bindings. And the model layer is usually the common JavaScript data objects, which becomes reactive once used by Vue model layer. So Vue usually transforms properties of such objects into pairs of get-set functions, enabling, the very fast updates of each of them. Yeah, however, there is an issue, at least it was with Vue 2, that if these techniques of Vue misused, basically it would result, in a lot of state updates, which are very taxing for, memory and CPU. But the latest iteration, the Vue 3, provided some concepts and tools which aim to to solve this issue, and also the source code was rewritten by TypeScript to reduce such issues. Okay. Just a minute, let me take some water. Yep, thank you for waiting. Let's move on to our next framework, the Angular. The most complex of these three. First of all, Angular requires from developers to be more or less proficient with TypeScript. And while both React and Vue subdivision was into components, the Angular takes one step further, dividing everything into modules, which are then contain the components. Each component would contain a connected template. The Vue actually was using the same pattern, but Vue uses so-called single file components, which look exactly like common HTML files, where you can write, in script and style tags. But yeah, mainly in case of Angular, the template is a separate HTML file, which then is connected with TypeScript component. And again, unlike React and Vue, Angular also does not support the virtual DOM. However, unlike its predecessor, the Angular JS, which was the initial variation of Angular, it also does not impose the model view controller pattern, again solving issues with performance and state management. Yes, as I told you before, it's quite true. The Angular is very complex, especially for newer developers. You can lose your YAS debug in Angular. Okay, let's move along about ecosystem. Yeah, so in case of React and Vue, at the beginning they provide the minimal set of technologies required to bootstrap your project and build it, and then on demand you have an official packages related to routing, global state management, testing, and so on to basically on demand add this functionality to your applications. And in case of Angular, it's a full-blown framework, which includes a lot of tools from the get-go. And unfortunately, the Angular developers usually do not have such rich possibility of including third-party libraries with various UI components or reusable logic. Usually, it's all included already into Angular development kit. And the main barrier is basically the TypeScript. Not many third-party libraries are written in a TypeScript. Yep, so moving on, about performance. We will discuss the three of these main metrics. It's the first contentful paint, which describes basically the time when the first bit of information is being rendered by a browser and provides a feedback that, the page is indeed loading. And correspondingly, as the largest contentful paint describes when the largest image or text node is being rendered by a browser. The first input delay also describes for when user first interacts with your website and it actually can respond to you. And two other metrics, which are cumulative layout shift and which describes the shifting of a page during its lifetime and time to first byte, which is the time when the first bit of information received from server, then they are not really depend on framework choice, so we will not focus too closely on them. So yeah, in case of React, you can see that first and largest contentful paint metrics are quite good with it. The same for first input delay. Also, on other diagram, you can see the JavaScript byte size of projects, which were sampled by Perf track. And you can see that around half of it are relatively lightweight. Yeah, so moving on with metrics for Vue framework, you can see that first and largest contentful paint are also on a good level and similar to React. And first input delay is even slightly better. And taking a look at JavaScript byte size, you could see that more than a half is very lightweight, and relatively lightweight are 70% of a sample. It kind of enforces the idea of Vue providing the simplest and most lightweight solution for user interface building. Yep, and about Angular. You can see that first and largest contentful paint metrics are not exactly as good. This can be related to Angular not using virtual DOM and, as I told you, including a lot of tools from the get-go, even if they may not be needed. But first input delays, again, has a quite good metrics. And finally, looking at the byte size, we can see that a huge chunk of this sample, again, around 70%, uses quite heavyweight JavaScript size. Well, you should take this metrics with a grain of salt, because it does not really tell you that, let's say, React or Vue is better than Angular or vice versa. It can also mean that Vue was usually used for, for more small and simple application, just, lightweight JavaScript, and Angular is well known as being one of top choices for large enterprise projects. Yeah, so moving on to learning curve. It seems a bit not that learning curve which I wanted to show you. Let's move along. Okay, still not that? Yeah, finally. Okay, it seems, our presentation was sabotaged by some diehard Vue fan. But, they are correct a bit that Vue is probably the simplest one of these three frameworks for, especially for newer developers. At the first steps, the Angular developer has to deal with, basically being required to program not in simple JavaScript, but in TypeScript. At the same time, React introduces this JSX syntax, which probably is not as difficult to learn, and Vue does not introduce anything new. Later on, Angular developers have to get used to the modular system, a lot of syntax, which some would say a boilerplate. And JavaScript and the React may be a bit confusing, because all development you do within React in JavaScript without strictly using HTML or CSS. And Vue with its single file components, which are very similar to regular HTML files, again, probably the simplest one to understand. Yeah, later on the steps of building apps, again, the Angular developers have to deal with a lot of included tools and libraries for state management, routing, dependency injection, while React try to improve the work with this management and lifecycle hooks by introducing so-called React hooks. But as you saw on a diagram before, it again can be a topic of confusion for some developers because while React hooks being a powerful tools for reusable logic, sometimes it's difficult to understand the use cases for each of them. And Vue, for this purpose, uses so-called concept of composition API, which again analyze, the experience of both React and Angular and try to make it simpler. There is a fun fact that a third-party library called Reactive Vue exists, and it basically provides for React a usage of Vue composition API. And yeah, on a later stage of deploying and optimizing your applications, the server-side rendering and so on, all these concepts are relatively complex for all three frameworks. Yeah, but does it mean that if Vue is the simplest one of these three, is it the best choice to learn? You can see the diagram of demand on job market of each framework. You can see that React tops it with the largest amount of job offers on LinkedIn, and Angular still securing quite steady position, yet again being one of the main choices for large enterprise projects. And Vue, well, relatively smaller, even though such names as Netflix or GitLab are using Vue as a part of its front-end stack, but Vue is still on a state of being adopted by larger enterprises. And yeah, let's talk about the most recent trends. As you know, back then the demand for front-end applications wanted to have a highly complex and reactive front-ends. That's why the JavaScript frameworks were developed, and more and more logic were moved to a client side within a single page front-end applications. But the demand always keeps rising, and still we need right now the complex front-ends, and at the same time frequent interactions with API and with server. So yet again we are moving on to the multiple page applications and to contain more and more logic on a backend. And with this helps probably the newest addition to ecosystem, so-called optimization frameworks. Yeah. At the same time, you can have highly interactive and reactive JavaScript-driven front-ends and the main business logic on the backend. And these frameworks provide you server-side rendering and allow you basically to run some code on a server or even during a build time. And you can see logos for all respective frameworks. So Analog for AngularJS, Nuxt.js for Vue, and finally Next.js for React. Well, to conclude with, this is what happens when you analyze each tech stack too much. It's true, believe me. So yeah, better to try it on your own. But yeah, all three frameworks right now are highly maintained, and they can be used without worrying too much about each of them going down. It's difficult to predict, which one of them will stay relevant in the long term, but yeah, it's important to know that Angular has a slower pace of adding new features and optimizations, unlike React and Vue. But at the same time, we saw the diagram of job offers, and yeah, we can see that both React and Angular still remain as the top choices which employers would want to see. And Vue, well, I would expect Vue will receive more love in the future. Yeah, important factors of selecting a framework for a project. They include, but of course not limited to, to a size and scale of your project and availability of resources. In case of React and Angular, you would probably have more chances to find more senior developers, but due to very low learning curve of Vue framework, it's easier to train junior developers. Yep, and while JavaScript frameworks are a powerful tool for developing highly reactive and complex front ends, it's still important to note the latest addition to ecosystems, the optimization frameworks, which would allow you to refactor your logic and have more of it on the back end. Well, thank you for your attention. Yeah, if you are interested in our company, here you can scan a QR code with our job offers. And again, thank you for attention and please your questions.
Which framework are you using in your company?
Well, in our current project, I of course cannot tell you a lot of details, but we're using Angular. Yeah, but if we talk about a general situation, yes, as a diagram of job demands show you, yeah, most of our clients want to see specialists of Angular and React. I guess we didn't receive much requests for Vue.
It's okay, okay. Second?
I have a question. How much more demanding in terms of RAM consumption are the JavaScript frameworks such as Angular, React, and Vue compared to just plain HTML and CSS files with JavaScript inserted when needed?
Could you please repeat your question?
I wanted to ask how much is the difference between RAM consumption, how much does RAM consumption differ between the JavaScript frameworks and just plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript inserted when needed?
Yeah, I guess I understood your question. So, yeah, you see, at first it may seem, that transitioning to working with JavaScript frameworks may seem a bit complex and so on, but, all these tools were developed with the sole purpose of improving the process of developing for the developers themselves. And, the demand of front-end applications could not match the possibilities which, the older tech stacks as, probably jQuery library provided. So yeah, my advice, at least, in terms of transition, would be to start probably from Vue framework, as it's the simplest one. But again, if you're also really seeking, to start applying for related jobs, probably React would be the best choice, as a framework with relatively not complex learning curve and the highest demand on market. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and third question is here. Yeah.
Hello, I'm David. I have
Hi.
a question about Angular. You mentioned that you are using Angular, and I'm like a new guy. I came from embedded fields, and I need to create an application in Angular. And I faced that, well, Angular is should be complicated and all the stuff, but for me it doesn't mean that. For me, what I faced, it's mind-boggling. You want to use MQTT and WebSockets, and you have to build from JavaScript and embed into Angular. So it's it's lack of libraries in Angular. And what's the way of the Angular? If it's improving, getting more libraries, or I don't know, because I'm new in that field.
Oh no, it's difficult to answer this question because each situation of each projects are quite unique. But at least the aim of Angular was to include the kit of tools which are usually used by large enterprise projects. And well, if these provided tools cannot help you with your goals, you would need to try and find the respective third-party libraries, which yeah, in case of Angular are not very rich. But really, it's difficult, to give you some concrete advice from the get-go in this situation.
Okay, but for example, if I use MQTT or WebSockets, it shouldn't be something special. I don't think it should be. And that's very rare that Angular doesn't have direct libraries inside, because WebSockets is like, wow, the whole network world should be, the web development is like expanding. It's not only HTTPS or something like this. You should have many protocols there, because you find many ways, and actually the corporations itself should find not only one straight way to do it. They could find many ways, and that's how progress goes. So that's the question. Well, if WebSockets are not implemented in Angular, so how it can be mature? I don't know. It's like very.
Well, you see, as I told you, Angular is still a full-blown framework, so it's it has the slowest pace of getting updates and optimizations. So sometimes in case of such technologies, yes, it's indeed difficult to cater to all needs, because after all, this set of tools was considered and included probably for some set of more or less predefined ways of development. So.
Okay, I'll continue again. Because if you are working with Angular, probably you see how it's evolving. So what you see, what's the future of Angular, for example, and how those other web frameworks could like catch the Angular or even throw to the history.
Well, you see, a few years ago there were a lot of, some articles saying that Angular is about to die and so on. But again, as you know, it's a solution used mostly by large enterprise projects, and you probably understand that the issue of large projects that they are how to say it better, they are not very likely to refactor or come away from their usual tech stack. So that's why Angular probably will stay relevant in long terms. But I do think, that the more perspectives are by React and Vue frameworks.
Okay, if you have another question, one more, okay? Another question, if you want, you can write to Artemii.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so which of these frameworks are your favorite? Which one? And also, for the entry-level developer, which one do you recommend to learn first?
Well, it probably would be inappropriate for me to say which one of them is my favorite, but as for your second question, yet again, for entry level, probably the Vue framework would be the easiest one to start with. As you know, usually the Vue single file components look very similar to your regular HTML files, and but yet again, as I told you, if you do plan, to, in a short-term perspective, start seeking some junior positions as a front-end developer, probably React is your best choice for it. Yeah, it's not as difficult as Angular to start with, and you are more likely to find the job offers.
Okay, Artemii? Okay, thank you very much.